Well, turning back to the U.S. China trade deal, let's bring in Tori Smith, trade economist at the Heritage Foundation. Tori, great to have you on the show. Will U.S. businesses and consumers feel the impact of this phase one deal when it is signed January 15th?
Well, we don't know yet, and the reason for that is that we don't actually know what's in this deal yet. Hopefully, prior to January 15th, we'll actually get the physical text. Right now, we just have some talking points from USTR, and really the devil's in those details.
So, Tori, you're right. We don't know a lot of these details. So is it surprising to you that the market is up so significantly this year, and certainly in December, since we had learned that a phase one deal was all but certain? It just needed to be signed.
Well, I think that it's good for the economy and good for the market and good for uncertainty to have some sort of idea that a deal will happen. And really that's coupled with the idea that there will be a tariff rollback. And for businesses, that's a really good thing. Both a rollback in U.S. tariffs and potentially an increase in market access for U.S. agriculture. So those are good things on the surface. What we really don't know is what the structural agreements are and what that will mean for the future of U.S.-China trade.
I'm wondering, Tori, about human rights here, because over the last year, as this trade deal has, or the trade war has been escalating, we have seen increased scrutiny on China from for its treatment of the Uyghur Muslim minority population, with camps reportedly in parts of the country holding tens of thousands of Uyghurs. I'm wondering how you think the U.S. should react to these human rights abuses that are occurring in China, and if in fact we should be such a big trade partner with the country.
Well, it's absolutely imperative for the United States to call out human rights abuses when they happen in China and everywhere else around the world, and to hold those entities accountable. I know that we at the Heritage Foundation have been advocating for specific sanctions on individuals who are violating human rights of Uyghurs and other populations within China. But I think we also need to pay attention to the trade issues separate from those topics, because if we get everything, the security, the human rights, the trade intertwined, it becomes very complicated to get advancement on any issues.
What are the chances, Tori, that China can actually hold up its end of the bargain here? Because there are concerns about its sheer capacity to buy tens of billions of dollars of agricultural products from the U.S.
Well, this is the real problem with managed trade being the focus of bilateral relations with China. This shouldn't just be a purchasing agreement. This should be an agreement to lower barriers to trade, not just on the tariff side, but on the non-tariff barrier side. And that's really the area where we're still not sure what the details are. This has to go beyond the surface level, and it may not be possible for China to uphold everything that the United States is asking in terms of quantity.
Right, so go into that a little bit, because the Chinese really, in order to bring the U.S. agricultural back to where it was, need to buy a substantial amount of U.S. agricultural products. Is the demand going to be there in China?
It really depends. Over the last year or so, we've actually seen some market share loss from the U.S. perspective in exchange for Brazilian market share gain in terms of, say, soybeans, for example. In China, really China has replaced that demand with Brazilian supply. Now, it depends on what sorts of purchasing agreements are made and whether or not they're in large lump sums or in smaller chunks throughout the next year or so.
Tori, when it comes to consumers and companies, does this phase one deal spur these companies to put on pause their plans to move production out of China so as to avoid any future issues that might arise as the trade war does continue on? Because, again, this is only a phase one deal.
Well, at this point, I think it's too early to tell. All we do know is there's a potential for decrease in uncertainty in the bilateral relationship. To what extent, we won't know. And I think even at January 15th, we may not know the full extent about how this relationship will move into the future. What we hope, though, is that the administration is serious about the rollback of tariffs. That is probably the best thing that can happen for American businesses right now, is getting back to the 2017 status quo of freer trade between the U.S. and China.
Terry, there's been a lot of analysis about the effect of tariffs on U.S. businesses. What are you seeing at the Heritage Foundation? How have tariffs affected the U.S. consumer and U.S. businesses?
Well, in the last week, we've actually seen a lot of our anecdotal evidence supported by a recent study by the Federal Reserve. They came out and said that, in fact, tariffs, not just China tariffs, but overall U.S. trade strategy has not only affected prices in the United States, but it's actually resulted in a decrease in manufacturing employment. And we've only seen that from an anecdotal perspective prior to this point. I think it goes to prove, and this is what the Fed says, it goes to prove that because supply chains are so international these days, we cannot resort just to tariffs to fix any sorts of bilateral trade problems. It has broad consequences.
Tori Smith, trade economist at the Heritage Foundation. Happy New Year. Thanks for joining us.
Happy New Year.
Thanks.